To learn more about earning college credits with study hall courses, go to gostudyhall.com or click the link in the description. Let's play a game. It's called Spot the Psychologists, and we've got 4 contestants. Ready? First up, we have Sam, who's listening to a patient share their hopes and fears while jotting things down in a notebook. Next, there's Amir, who's using a statistics program to make sense of survey data. Our third contestant, Toru, who's running an MRI machine looking for signs of stress in the brain. And finally, there's Alex, who's supervising people playing a memory game. So which one is the psychologist? Nope, it's all of them. That's because, like other kinds of science, psychology research is super varied. We're studying people after all. So there are so many different questions we could ask, like, does a confident person experience less stress? Or which parts of the brain become active when we feel embarrassed for someone else? The answers often get shared and interpreted outside psychology, even becoming part of our cultural beliefs. That means if we truly want to understand humans and how we behave and interpret the world accurately, we need to understand how psychology reaches certain conclusions. And understanding that can help you think more critically about everything in your life. Hi, I'm Deja Fitzgerald, and this is Study Hall, Intro to Psychology. Psychology is a science, and science is the process of asking and investigating questions. But in psychology, that doesn't always mean lab coats and beakers and watching brain cells in a petri dish. Psychology includes both empirical research based on experiments and observing things with your senses, and subjective data about people's experiences. Like, say you wanted to study what anxiety disorders look like. You could do what's called descriptive research, where you observe human behavior without interfering with it. More specifically, you could do a case study and focus on an individual or group diagnosed with anxiety, and attempt to observe what triggers that anxiety. Or you could use naturalistic observation, where you observe many people in a real-world setting, like in a group counseling setting. Alternatively, instead of observing people, you can make a survey and have participants answer questions. Or if you want to go back and look at several years of data, you could look through web pages or social media posts and archival research. These are all types of descriptive research, and they involve gathering information and identifying patterns and behaviors. But what if you wanted to figure out the relationship between two things, like how anxiety symptoms relate to stress? In that situation, you could use correlational research instead. Like with descriptive research, correlational research also happens without experimenters controlling any variables. And it might involve things like surveys and digging through archives. But the key is that you're looking at relationships. When it comes to correlational research, it's also huge to remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. Like, say a study found that people who ate a lot of beans were more likely to be diagnosed with depression. A news report might say, beans, the musical fruit. The more you eat, the more you have clinical depression. But that's not what the study said. The researchers just found that beans and depression symptoms were positively correlated. When one went up, so did the other. But the results could be a coincidence, or maybe depression and bean eating are both caused by some third thing. Similarly, another study might find a negative correlation, where one thing goes up and the other goes down. Like if people use more of something and that lowered the rates of depression. Like, I don't know what's the opposite of beans, therapy, but that still doesn't mean one caused the other. Correlational research is important because there's a lot you can't run experiments about, at least not ethically. Like if scientists genuinely had reason to believe that beans could cause depression, which they don't, by the way, at the very least, it's not great and also extremely gassy to try to cause depression by feeding one group of participants dump trucks of legumes. There are some things that can be fairly tested though, and that's where experimental research comes in. When doing descriptive research and experiments, researchers use the scientific method, a series of steps to ask and investigate questions and analyze answers. Like, say I notice that I'm really focused right after I eat French onion soup. I might wonder if there's a connection between soup and memory, and that's totally something I could test with an experiment. In fact, making an observation and asking a question are the first 2 steps of the scientific method. And step number 3 is making a hypothesis, a precise, testable statement. Though sometimes this gets grouped with step 2, asking questions. Now personally, I think soup improves memory, but the hypothesis I'm going to test is actually the opposite. My official hypothesis is that if people have soup, their ability to remember things won't improve. I'm going to predict that people won't do better on a memory test after they have a bowl of delicious French onion. This sounds a little backwards, but stick with me here. Saying that soup doesn't improve memory is what's called a null hypothesis, also known as H0 or H null. It says there's no relationship between two things. In psychology, we assume that the null hypothesis is valid unless you can provide evidence otherwise, kind of like how someone is innocent until proven guilty. So no matter how much I want to believe that French onion soup can help people remember more of the things they learn, it's up to me to get that data to support that. Welcome to Psyched for Soup Cafe. To test my null hypothesis, I first recruit research participants of diverse backgrounds and divide them into two groups. One gets some steaming hot French onion from the kitchen, and the other is the control group. No soup for you, sorry. After lunch, both groups play a memory game, and I end up with a spreadsheet of the results. I can then run a statistical test that fits the question I'm asking and works with the kind of data I have. In this case, we have two groups, and we measured just one thing: performance on the memory game. So we can use a statistical test called a t-test to compare the average performance of the two groups. And the results will tell us whether the null hypothesis was supported or rejected by this experiment. In plain English, this means that either the two groups did just about the same in the memory game, which is what we expect for the null hypothesis, or one group did better than the other. In this case, the t-test tells me that the two groups, soup and no soup, are about the same. So soup doesn't improve memory. End of story? Well, not quite. Statistical tests or models can only tell you about the specific data you're analyzing. In this experiment, we didn't learn everything there is to know about soup and memory. We simply didn't get any evidence that soup improves memory. But I could do another experiment with more people or a different soup and get totally different results. That's part of the scientific method. It's more of a cycle than a linear process. In science, the answers to questions lead to more questions that can be tested with experiments. And the more experiments you do, the more confident you can be in your results. There are different ways of explaining the scientific method, but the general process is the same. We go through a series of steps to ask and investigate questions and finally report our results. As we wrap up this soupy journey, it's worth noting that this experiment does have limitations. A big one is that since people aren't clones, the two groups I had wouldn't be completely identical. This is why the number of participants in a study can really matter. The more people you test, the less likely it is that any normal human variation will impact your findings. So if you ever see a study with some incredible, mind-boggling results, but it is only tested with 3 people, it's probably worth asking why that number is so small. Similarly, as you encounter more and more psychology research, you'll learn to look for other red flags, signs that you should think critically about the study's results and how they, or you, got their evidence. For example, it's entirely possible for a study to have a solid statistical analysis, but not be reliable or valid. In psychology, reliability refers to the consistency and reproducibility of results across time, while validity refers to whether a method actually measured what it's intended to within a real-world context. To use a non-psych example, take my watch. It's always 77 minutes fast, which is reliable, but not valid. It's consistently ahead, but doesn't match how we describe the world. Generalizability also matters. In other words, how applicable are a study's results to a broader group? Like if a medication was only tested on white men under 30, the results might not apply to everyone. And these facts, generalizability, reliability, and validity do come up. In fact, there's something known as the replication crisis in psychology, where many classic papers don't hold up to being retested. AKA, they're unreliable. In 2015, when 100 experiments were rerun, only 39 were able to duplicate the original findings. Famously, if you've ever heard that so-called power poses make you more confident and eloquent, you know poses like this. Bad news. The experimental findings this is based on couldn't be replicated, and a re-examination of the original data analysis turned up issues. This doesn't mean psychology results are worth less than results in other fields of science. It just means you've got to put on your critical thinking caps. And if you really want to get the clearest picture of something, it's worth looking at multiple studies and sources. Now, we spent a lot of time talking about how psych research is done. But a big piece of the puzzle we haven't really talked about is ethics. After all, it doesn't matter how good you are at statistical analysis if you're harming people along the way, which has happened in psychology. A lot. Nowadays, researchers have to follow various principles, guidelines, and laws that lay out specific ethical requirements for how people are treated in a study. These requirements are different depending on the country, but in all cases, the goal of these documents is to protect study participants from harm. One way this is done with an Institutional Review Board, or IRB for short, is sometimes called a Research Ethics Committee or Ethics Review Committee too. Best research practices, and often the law, say that before conducting a study involving people or their data, researchers have to get the approval of an IRB. This committee reviews study proposals to make sure that the well-being of study participants is safeguarded. In the last few decades, science has come a long way, but there's still a ways to go when it comes to making studies more thoughtful and just. And we'll get into that in our episode on critical research design. So when you read about scientific progress in popular media, most of the time you're reading the work of journalists or writers who are quickly summarizing a more complex paper. And while this is great in a lot of ways, it can also make the process of understanding human behavior seem like a big black box or a squishy, brain-shaped one. But getting into the weeds of research can be a lot of fun and a way to develop new skills, test out your most intriguing psychology-related ideas, and understand the world in different ways. It's the sort of thing that can make you not only a better budding psychologist, but also a better critical thinker. So next time you see an article, a research paper, or even a TikTok that claims something incredible or even just interesting, don't forget to wonder how the psychologist got to that conclusion in the first place. If you're enjoying Study Hall Intro to Psychology and are interested in taking an online course and earning college credit, go to gostudyhall.com or click on this button to learn more. Thanks for watching. See you next time.